Hmm. Now, here's another way to reframe this idea of inhibition is, when you stand up after an ATM and you feel lighter and moving is less effort, what's what's happened is that you have inhibited some, what was probably some rather chronic firing of muscles, your nervous system telling your muscles to work. You've stopped doing that, and that's required an active inhibition. You've stopped something, and it feels marvelous. You feel free. So inhibition isn't about clamping down and bracing. That's an inhibition through activation. That's a different kind of thing. The inhibition that we're talking about is a cessation, actually, that Narayan said about, is the absence of something. It's the space. Can you feel the difference? So you could inhibit your leg moving by stiffening it. But that's actually not neurological inhibition, that's facilitation. Whereas if your leg is really free to roll, then you have, that's what we mean in this sort of neurological sense of inhibition. I think I may be just confusing the point, but I'm trying to diffuse the negative loading that this word inhibition has. So noticing that as you lie there quietly, any tension that was, say, in your tummy muscles that were keeping your tummy quite still is now no longer happening. So you've inhibited that automatic firing, and your belly is free to lengthen with your breath. They're really difficult because they're sort of really subconscious firings, and they're so momentary. As soon as you think of, how can I stop it? Well, it's already happened. It's like a hiccup. I can't stop a hiccup because it's already happened. One thing you can play, there's a general kind of tonus, if you like, in your nervous system. And so some people get the tics and spasms as their nervous system is down-regulating. Some people get it when they're up-regulating. So you might, some people that I work with tics, what they do is actually just put a little voluntary movement in their system and to mask the tics as they're down-regulating, so it's not quite so annoying. They might do some rocking or something like that. One thing that is not particularly useful is to brace against them, as you probably, as you can feel. The sense, what else is quietly reducing in its work? So you are diminishing the firing, as it were, the activation. Maybe in the small of your back. If you roll your head, your neck might maybe starting to let go, or is your jaw feeling a little bit more free to open and close and be slack? Not, slack to the point of dribbling. Or if you want to dribble, that's fine. If your lips were clamped together, can they soften a little bit? Are your eyes screwed shut, or they're just gently shut? Your fingers lying long, your feet, your legs rolled out a little bit. All these markers of a cessation of activity. And roll over and lie on your stomach. And have your head turned to the left and your hands on the floor somewhere on either side of your head. Bend your knees and sense where your feet are in space. Now, I've kind of hinted at this a fair bit. It's hard. This is really difficult to discern here. We are so habitually used to knowing where our feet are in relation to the ground. So without the ground, they can be literally lost in space. So acknowledge that it's fuzzy relative to, say, where the front of your knees are on the ground, that your self-image gets fuzzier. How fuzzy it gets is individual, but for everybody, there is a slight fuzziness around this when your feet are in space. Are they, what exact angle is your ankle making? Is it that kind of 90-degree angle that if you're standing on your feet? And gently start flexing and extending your ankle, both ankles together to start with. And with this idea that movement can clarify, the sense of movement can clarify position. So even though you might not know exactly where your feet are, as clearly as say you do with your knees, the movement starts to enliven the internal image of self. Starts to add a few more colours to the palette. If you were drawing or painting these feet. And now alternate so that they go in the opposite. So that as one foot, the toes point to the ceiling, the other foot, the toes are pointing more towards the floor. And is it smooth? There's a lot of habitual work happening in ankles. So people, I do this a lot. I work a lot with people who have balance issues. And so clarifying their ankles and clarifying this change between dorsiflexion and plantarflexion, if you want the official terms, is a really important balance movement, this coordination between these two muscle groups. The calf that points the toes and the muscles in the front of the shin that pull the toes down. Now, actually, in this position, I'd have to say that's the calf working all the time, but let's not get too pedantic. And if you go really slowly, you can actually feel that it's the calf pulling the toes up, and then it's the calf lowering the toes down. They can drop as well. But it's actually really hard to let the calf go and just let the foot drop to really inhibit the calf. Maybe you get a sense of that. It's so chronically working. And go fast. Not the knees, just the ankles. Yeah. So that's inhibiting, right? I've just asked you to inhibit something so that you can differentiate the ankles. That's it. But leave it, just rest the ankles from it. Rest your legs long for a microsecond. There's something very jolly about that movement, very frivolous. There's a feeling quality to it. I don't know if you felt it. I observe it. Very kind of flip. Anyway, bend your knees again. Now I'm going to give an indistinct instruction and see how many ways you can interpret it. So take your legs away from each other. And there are so many ways in the room. You're very creative. Yeah, so it really depends on your interpretation of the word legs, doesn't it? Legicity. Which parts of your body have the qualities of being a leg? Okay, so let's go through just a couple of the possibilities. So you could slide your knees away from each other, keeping your knees bent, but slide the whole thing. So that's a movement for next week. That's it. Now bring them back so that the thighs are somewhat parallel. If your legs were your lower legs, then your thighs stay quiet on the floor, and you take your actually, in a sense, your feet go away from each other. Where's that movement happening? It's also happening in the hip joints. And you recognize it from, so if you're taking your feet sideways away from each other, so your knees stay bent, and then they come together, where's that movement happening? In relation to yesterday's conversation, it's a movement of internal rotation at the hip joints. So as the front of your thighs are going inwards. Can you feel that as an experience? So if you're like watching the magician and you're looking at his hands and you're thinking that this is the movement of the feet, no, the feet are just being moved. They're going through space. They're not actually changing shape. The movement is occurring in the hip joints. And then bringing your feet together, or your lower legs together, depending on how far your knees are apart, feel that rolling, what feels like rolling inward if your orientation is to the feet, it's actually a rolling outward of the hip joint. What the hell? Keep going a little bit like that, a bit more and a bit more. And when your feet come in and they find each other, which bits of the foot touch first? They miss each other. So when they touch, if they're moving equally, where do they touch? Does the heel touch first? Find a way that the heel could touch first. What would you manipulate? So the timing is equal in each leg so that they meet in the middle. What would you manipulate consciously so that the heels would touch first? What do you have to adjust? That the toes are pointing outward relatively and the heels come together and they touch. Whereabouts on the heel? Do that a few times. And find a way that the big toes could touch first. What would you adjust in terms of the manipulation? The timing has to be equal so they meet in the middle. You adjust the orientation so that the movement is different. But to get a different orientation, you adjust the movement. And then alternate. One time they come into the middle and the heels touch. The next time they go away from each other. The next time they come in and the toes touch. You know, it's a bit of a Charleston thing, isn't it? I could start doing a little bit of a swing thing. And what do you like better? Touching your heels, flicking your heels like Dorothy, or the toes? You know, I was pigeon-toed. It would be no great stretch for me to bring my toes together. In my language, I was pigeon-toed. Now that's foregrounding my disability as a child. It's my defining feature. Language gives us away. Yeah, well, I'm not having a go at myself. I'm just pointing out that my language is interesting. Okay, rest your legs down long for a minute. Not a full minute, actually. If you need to change your head position, go ahead. Has that exploration had any influence on the way you're lying on the floor? The way your pelvis is contacting, or the belly, or the breathing, or the chest, or the head, or the shoulders? Now, we've been working somewhat symmetrically, so I'm not anticipating that there's a big difference between right and left, but who knows? Like I said, you're the black box on the floor. I can only hypothesize what's going on as the teacher. so to speak. So, you know, in that sense, when you're a Feldenkrais teacher, you're not a teacher who knows everything. You know some things and you can make reasoned guesses. Okay, bend your knees up again. Have your feet there. Your knees are a little bit apart, not, you know, not, it's Goldilocks. They're not close together and they're not far apart. Equipoise. Okay, and now keep your left lower leg still. So your left foot stays still in the air and your right foot goes inwards to touch the left leg. Now, what touches first? So if the left leg doesn't move, the feet aren't going to meet. So this is inhibiting movement in many ways. You're inhibiting all over the place, otherwise you'd be ataxic. People with ataxia have trouble inhibiting and they're all over the place. So where do you touch? And how would you change the movement so the orientation is different so that it would be the right toe that touches first? Because what I'm seeing is some people their toe touches first, some people their heel touches first, some people it's the instep. Do you know enough about where your right foot is that you could make a choice to direct it? So the toe touches, the left foot is just there impassive. It's being wooed, right? It's not making any, you know, this is the chat up in the bar where the person's just accepting the drinks and not making any commitment. And the right leg is doing all the action. Then the heel can touch, so, you know, wherever it can touch, where it will, where the left leg allows it to actually. You think, well, the left leg's not moving, but it only affords certain opportunities. Good. And now take them back parallel as they were. And now the right leg is just the one sitting at the bar receiving the drinks, and the left leg is making all the overtures that go over. It's what touches first. And do that a few times so you're really clear. And then start exploring the possibilities of the heel touching first, the instep touching first, the toes, or whatever else. You know, you don't have to be kind of restricted by my lack of imagination. The constraint is that the right leg stays still. And we use constraints a lot. This is a conscious use of an inhibition or a constraint in the system that will evoke something else. So we'll talk a lot more about that from a systems point of view later. Not in this segment, maybe. And can you attend to your whole self as you're doing it? Is all your attention exclusively in the foot or the toe or the heel or the right leg or the left leg? Can you pay attention to what's happening in your hip joints, your pelvis, contact that you're making with the floor, with your belly, with your chest, your sternum? So are you doing this with your entire self, which doesn't mean that everything's doing a big job. It's just, is your entire self, the possibility of your entire self in your current self-image, what you're paying attention to. But leave it rest, have your legs out long. Now this is a movement that we did yesterday, but on your back. So the change in orientation, same movement, but it will feel different, is keeping your leg long. Start off with one leg, just to make it easier, and roll your heel in and out. Keep your leg long. The knee stays straight. Let's see, I can put all this nonsense on the board about rotation and a longitudinal axis. And that's just the language of it. You've all got the concept of it. You embody it. And now start doing it with both legs. And do the heels go in towards each other together and roll away from each other together, or do they do, both roll to the right and both roll to the left? What did you do spontaneously and then do the other? So often, in learning situations, we get hung up on the languaging of the thing. And in here, the languaging is kind of secondary to it. So this is our challenge with those competencies, right? Is to not reduce the embodied competency by bringing it into language, in the act of writing it down or explaining it. Can we maintain the richness of the embodied experience of feeling competent without the diminishing that may, or the anxiety that languaging may produce? Now, for some people who putting stuff into language is what they love doing, and the embodied experience is hard. So you don't know what I'm talking about when I say that. Because for you, this is hard. Describing it biomechanically with a longitudinal axis is easy. Feeling it is hard. Sensing it is hard. Leave it. Rest just for a moment. If you need to change your head position, do so. And begin again the rolling of the heels. And now just choose one kind of pattern. Is my suggestion, because if you free range this, you'll do your head in. Have your head turned to the left and start the rotating of your legs around that long axis. So your heels are, that's going in and out, or left and right, whichever you like, but pick one. And begin the movement of your eyes going up and down as if they're looking up, so towards the top of the sockets and down towards the bottom of the socket. Easier to roll your legs if your feet stay long. You're rolling over the dorsum of your foot. You're rolling over the hairy bit of your foot. For some people, it gets a bit crampy, but do your bit. If you're rolling over the tips of your toes, it gets a bit funny on your nails. So your face is to the left, your legs rolling in and out, your eyes are going up and down. And now, with your right knee, find a way that your right knee can come off the floor, but your right foot stays on the floor. And keep the rolling. So the foot stays on the floor and the right knee lifts off. So there's some kind of action in the back of your hip. And if it's really unclear, stop the rolling and find a way to bring your right knee off the floor. And remember, your right knee is not your right foot. So your foot stays on the floor. And it's only a tiny lift. Right? And for some people, it's really hard because you don't have hyperextension in the knee. So the knee might only lift a tiny bit, and the knee doesn't bend, it actually straightens more. You think my knee's already straightened, it can straighten more. And then once that's somewhat clear, can your leg roll with the knee off the floor? So you'll feel a little bit maybe more pressure under the front of the foot, maybe under the pelvis. And feel quite inadequate and uncoordinated. But some people keep their knee braced like this all the time. They stand up and they lock their knee back in this position for so-called stability. And I say to them, how stable is a broomstick? You've turned your leg into a broomstick. Is that really what you think stability is? Have you lost your eyes? What do you lose? The rotation of the legs or the turning of the eyes or your breath? What's the compromise? And then make a quiet pact to not compromise on the breath. Leave it rest. And what's the influence of that straightening of the right knee? So both legs are turning, but only one is straightening. How do you sense the right leg versus the left leg after that little quiet shift in attention and activation? Turn your head to the right and continue with the turning of the legs around their length. So you're facing the right, start the legs turning, so you're just rolling over the top of your nails. And then begin the movement of the eyes up and down. So how small do you have to make things? How slow to combine these things, and finding that way of making these two things one thing. Which probably in your life you've never had to do before. I can't think of a function for this. And then begin to straighten the right knee and lower it as your legs are turning. So your right leg is turning with the knee off the floor. So the front of the toes, not the bottom of the toes. If your foot's going into push-up position, probably it'll activate so much you might not feel. But see if it's comfortable enough to roll over the nails of your toes on the floor. It's dastardly, right? How do you deal with dastardliness? How do you deal with dastardliness? Dastardly is like this is a bit evil, a bit mean. Evil's too strong a word. Old-fashioned sort of bad guys were dastardly. This is a bit mean. How do you rise to the challenge, though? Leave it, rest on your tummy. Put your head in a comfortable position, but stay on your tummy. I forgot to keep reminding, if you are getting cramps and I'm telling you to do the opposite, just settle. Stop doing it, in other words, or, attend to yourself and ignore me. Okay, now bend your knees and have your feet, actually no, put your legs down. Did I ask you to just attend to the difference between your right and your left leg? Because they were doing something similar and different. What's the influence of the similar and the different? Now bend your knees, sorry. And do you remember what it felt like? What you could sense and in a way couldn't sense of your feet when you first did this morning? So are you becoming a bit more aware of what you don't know? So you're starting to know what you don't know, or starting to sense what you didn't sense. So becoming more aware of the gaps, because now we're starting to fill them in a little bit. So wiggle your feet up, up and down. That was the very first thing. Is there a difference now in your discernment of the feet? And they can go opposite, they can go together. Is there a difference between the right foot and the left foot? Maybe, maybe not. You can bring them together. They can have a little smooch in the middle. That's it. When they touch, it's quite gentle, right? And it's quite informative. It's like they validate each other, because if one's sensing the other's sensing it. Oh, I know where I am because you're touching me there. That's it. Leave it, roll onto your back. And what is the experience of yourself, your entire self now, lying on your back? The length of the right leg, length of the left leg. The contact with the floor, which is the, our most kind of potent measure of muscle activity, if you like, engagement, disengagement of muscles. Oh, I hate that tune because that's the one that I use when I've got a red eye light. Who gets to bring cake? Jenny. Oh. Yeah, so that's, my association with that tune is 4 o'clock in the morning when I have to get up and catch a red eye somewhere. I can associate it with good cake now. Well done. Yeah, true. Oh, I like your thinking. So there you are, lying on the floor, and you've got feet, and you've got lower legs, and you've got knees, and you've got thighs, and hip joints, pelvis. So, you do an inventory of all of you. Tick, 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 tick. I've got breathing apparatus. I've got ribs. I've got belly. I've got lower back. I've got sternum. I've got shoulder blades. I've got arms. I've got neck. I've got eyes. I've got head. I've got jaws. I've got whatever. How are the details within the entirety of yourself? So remember, once you've acknowledged the entire self, like I love you, then you kind of have permission to say, oh, and you know what? I love your butt. B-U-T-T, not I love you, but as in those characters that put but on the end of every sentence. I love you, but not like that. And roll over quietly, gently, come up to standing with your entire self. What's it like to stand on the feet now? So what's your relationship to your feet, with your feet now that they've got this different orientation and they've got this different function, they're taking weight. So if you swayed your weight a little bit forwards and a little bit backwards, actually it's the same movement as flexing it. Your ankle is flexing and extending a little bit, or dorsiflexing and plantarflexing, to be more accurate. But it's a tiny movement now. Experience is so different, so you might not recognize it sensorially. So thinking wise, you can recognize it, and then you can shift your weight left and right. That's a different movement in the ankle complex. But you did it when your ankles were free. You might not recognize it from a sensory point of view. That's fine. You just might recognize it intellectually, thinking wise. And then if you turn around yourself, keep your feet still, and you turn around, again, you might not sensorially recognize the turning in the hips. Intellectually, you might be able to see, you might be able to think through the similarity. So we can foreground and background the thinking of the movement and the sensing of the movement. There might be, the feeling, emotions attached to it. Maybe not. And it's all the doing. The doing, we're just manipulating, changing the timing, orientation, and then hook. And pay attention to the engagement and disengagement of the foot. Each foot on the ground, off the ground, on the ground, off the ground. What touches first? So mostly it's the heel, touches first. I work with people where it's not the heel. And they're disoriented, their feet are disoriented on the ground. There's something about this heel making contact and then rolling over onto the toes and the movement of the ankle that allows that to happen. And then the disengagement with the ground, and the heel lifts up, and then the toes are the last to leave. There's some people like that, aren't they? They're the last to come, the first to come to the party and the last to leave. Upset your knees, okay. So small, yeah, you know how to look up yourself. There's a lot of knee business in here. The knee's sort of the elephant in the room in that ATM. So the heels, they're first to arrive and the first to leave. The toes, they're last to arrive and the last to leave. Which one's introverted, which one's extroverted, who the hell knows? If your toes were the first to arrive, so the first to contact the floor, what would that feel like walking? Well, this is women walking in high heels. Kevin, I'm not saying anything about how good you look in high heels. That would be private. Sorry? Just on the weekend, that's right. I'm not prying into your Saturday night excursions. It's none of my business. But what is it like to contact, just the toes? So I'm really hopeless in high heels. When I'm fully mature, I'll be able to walk in high heels, not because I want to, but just because it would be interesting. It's not something that my habitual pattern of walking affords me, because I have a very clear heel strike. If you're walking in stilettos, you can't. Huh? You run. Some people run on their toes. Some people, depends. There's a whole, don't get me started, the barefoot running heel strike versus toe strike business. They get obsessed with that at my workplace. So some people don't have a heel strike when they're running and some people do. Depends, and it depends on your shoes, let's say, and your barefootedness. But if you want to go for a run and see what you do, don't feel constrained. You can increase the timing. So if you contemplate this idea that walking and running are very, very similar, it's a question of timing in the timing, orientation, and manipulation. Put that to the test. Now don't forget your eyes, because your eyes and your ankles are connected by the body bone. So can you be aware of your ankles and your feet and your eyes at the same time? Yeah, you have to be when you're running around and leaping like that. Like, see the connection. These two things need to work together. The eye bones are connected to the foot bones by the body bone. And now you may connect the eye bones with the ankle bones and the wee bones or the drinking bones to have a break. But that's not good to put the word break in the context of bones, is it? That's probably why your knees are feeling a bit, because they would do some of the work. I was